What's up, everybody? Welcome to Gojo with Mike Golick Jr. That is me. With me, as always, a man who I hope at least moves to the side of the moving walkway if he chooses to stand there in the airport, Brandon Newman. Brandon, what's going on?
Nothing much, Mike. I'm excited to talk about airport etiquette with you this morning, as well as football. I'm trying to think of the most annoying thing I do in line at the airport. I'm probably the guy that falls asleep way too early before the flight takes off.
I don't think that's a bad thing, though. I think that's a skill.
Is it? Okay.
A very useful one,
I'm glad I'm on the right
frankly.
side.
Yeah, welcome to the right side of history here. Welcome to this podcast. We got a good one for you guys today. Plenty going on in the NFL. Young quarterback stepping to the mic and not acquitting himself very well after getting outdone by his punter. Yeah, Jets fans, I'm looking at you guys. I think a clear MVP frontrunner emerging, and some roses to give out as well on this Monday. It is a busy football Monday, as you guys are used to. But yeah, Brandon, I don't know what stress. So this will be my last week traveling for college football. I was at the South Carolina upset of Tennessee this weekend, on the call for that one for Learfield Audio, which was wild and awesome and a ton of fun to be around. But I'm at the point now in the season where I've been on the road for 12 straight weeks, and so I've internalized so much at the airports that I've really, I think, got a real keen beat on the worst things that people do inside that place. Because I don't know, man. I feel like people get on those grounds, and I get it. Traveling is hard, but man, you find out really quick who has ever been a part of a team or a good teammate and who hasn't very quickly.
Wow. Yes. You can show just how selfish you are when you're running around an airport and dealing with your quote-unquote things and entitlement, Mike. I never think about that. That's something that shows very bright when it comes to proper airport etiquette.
Well,
right? The community thing that you speak of so much.
Well, exactly. I have always said, in a different light, that blackjack's a team game. As much as you're in there trying to win for yourself, we all kind of have, if we all do this the right way, again, you're never going to totally erase the deficit against the house, but you give yourself a better chance by being consistent and being cognizant. I think that same thing applies to the airport, where it's like my sister was a college swimmer. And you go out there when you're swimming, you're technically in the pool by yourself, but you're a part of a team. And you can put the right energy into that process or not. And so this is my PSA. We're getting ready for one of the busiest, most hellish travel weeks that exists leading up to Thanksgiving.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
You don't have to be that asshole at the airport. And what do I mean by that asshole, Brandon? I'm glad you asked. I figured out, I think I've distilled it down to four really to me egregious airport sins that people make. First and foremost for me, people that stand in the middle of the moving walkway in the airport with no awareness of anyone else who's coming their way. I get that not everyone wants to move on that. Move off to the side. Be aware if you feel people in a rush behind you and give them room to operate.
Well, the moving walkway clearly states which side to stand and which side to walk. I think as we've elevated as a society, we've seen that if you're going to walk on the moving walkway, it's usually a middle lane thing. If you're walking at all, then you must hug that wall and damn near have one leg hanging off, because people are moving on there. Children are enjoying themselves on there for the first time. It's like the joys of an escalator in a hallway.
It's an awesome time. You feel like you're getting shot super speed at the end when you step off that thing. That's why they tell you to be careful. You're exiting the moving walk. It's a rush. But yeah, no, I had a couple the other day that was just standing in the middle, and they could look back and see the log jam of people that they had started, and they had no earthly interest in budging. And so I promise you, hell's hottest, darkest corner has a space reserved for you if that's how you want to act inside the airport. Number two, the person who opens up their window on a 6 a.m. flight and just absolutely baptizes the rest of the plane in the sun. I get everyone says I paid for that ticket, and if I want to look outside, yeah, you can do all that stuff. I can go to a restaurant and scream loudly near your table, but no one would like that experience, and I'd probably be asked to leave. That's essentially what you're doing, is yelling at the rest of the plane with the sun.
I hear you, and I agree with you. As someone who usually prefers the window seat and getting knocked out before the plane starts, I'm usually guarding that thing. But you get some kids that reach over, and that's why I think there has to be some What was the word I'm looking for?
No, my thing is like, yeah, there are obvious exceptions for like people that have like a physical ailment or a legitimate need. Kids are always an outlier for me because I can't expect them to act rationally. And that's another thing. Be patient with kids on these planes, you assholes. Don't be one of the people that's groaning at parents.
Man.
Listen, I've always said if I was going to run for political office, I would run on the platform that parents shouldn't have to pay for anything once they're on airport grounds because they are fighting God's truly toughest battle.
Mike, you don't even fucking know, and you do know, and I appreciate you, but I had a 4-hour layover in Denver going from Santa Barbara back to Louisville. Thank God for Denver's double moving walkways in a row, because other than that, I don't know what I would have done to keep Carter excited. He had ice cream that day. Like, there's all kinds of rules that are getting broken just to keep him sane for those 4 hours.
There are no rules as far as airport consumption for adults. And I feel like for kids, it's by any means necessary on every front. Like I landed at LAX the other day and I saw a guy draining Sam Adams in a small airport bar at 8:30 in the morning. And I'm like, brother, whatever. Because in general, like with life, my policy on religion and operating in the airport is, hey, life is hard, whatever gets you through it, as long as you're not hurting anybody else. And that is where these people come. Because again, traveling is a tough experience. The last one, or the third one, Brandon, people who don't remove their bin, sometimes that you have to use at TSA when they're done being used. There's a finite amount of space on that belt. And if you want to just go get started on your day and leave it there, you're making problems for everyone else, and you're an asshole.
Hey, just like I'm the guy that will hold the door 30 seconds to wait for somebody who's probably 25 yards away, I am collecting all the bins as if I work there, Mike. Like, and I feel you.
Yes.
It's an issue, but somebody's got to help. Like you said, in this community, I have to say, Mike, though, my number one person on the plane that really bothers me, because I don't really have a lot of things that really irk me, but my senses are one of those things that are up there. So you talk about the bright light in the early flight, like that gets me, but if somebody cracks into some fish while we're up in the air, or whatever their fragrant dish is that consumes the entire airport or the entire airplane, Mike, not a big fan. That person's evil for me.
Yeah, you know what? I have some empathy for that, just because, again, like, you got to eat at some point.
You're hungry.
Yeah, you're hungry. Like, I'm trying to excuse things that are certainly vital life functions. Because the last one for me also just drives me up a wall. And in general, in the airport, I want to talk to no one. I want to get in and out of there with as little human interaction as possible, really minimize all that. The closest I get to usually getting into a verbal altercation with people is when they decide to cut the line for deplaning. Unless, it is a very simple world on the plane. We all understand connections are a real thing, and if you got to get up and you got a tight connection, you get up, you make it known early, you ask everyone around you, and usually everyone's been there and will allow you to help and go through that process faster. If you don't, and you just feel like you're more important than the rest of the plane, and start to try and jump up rows or cut people as they're deplaning because you're impatient, no, I got no time for that. That's the person I will gladly, especially as a bigger bodied person, stand up and block in the aisle so that the people in front of me can take their time in getting out and doing what they need to do. Because again, if you declare your intentions, I'm absolutely going to be a team player. Would absolutely love to help you out. If you're just an asshole that wants to get out of there sooner because you think your time's more valuable, I got news for you. I can be that phrase, better door than a window, I can be a good ass door. I can be a really willing door.
Oh, willing, obviously, as an offensive lineman. But, Mike, I am right there with you because as someone who has a 2-year-old who's trying to mime things that he likes, I often tell him, use your words, right? When it comes to airport etiquette, a lot of people try to use physical body language to try to let everybody know what they want. It's like, no, use your words, communicate. If you say, I have a connection that I might miss, like, communicate that. I think everyone else in the community, as we're speaking of, would love to help you out. But Mike, my biggest issue is boarding planes. I hate when people try to jump the lines boarding planes. There's a lot of stuff going on, mainly because the flight attendants do not get paid during that time period, Mike. So I like to think about them and the fact that they don't get paid for deplaning or boarding planes. So they need to get up there so they can get start getting their money. So I think respect for them first and foremost.
That is also the thing that, as I was compiling the list, I had to go back and put it number one, which is don't be an asshole to flight attendants. Like, man, It is hard. It is hard for everyone. They are operating on behalf of entities that I understand. Airline companies are incredibly frustrating at times and make decisions that frustrate a lot of us in different ways. And around the holidays, that will be no different. It will be a lot of shit that happens. And these people are, by and large, doing their very best to try and make this experience palatable for everybody. So don't give the flight attendants a hard time. Don't make their life any harder. Again, that's the golden rule of the airport. Don't make anyone else's life any harder than it has to be. Don't do it.
You had a slip of the tongue, but I think we might slip into an industry. Hard attendants as forcers, as enforcers on flights.
Oh, a flight attendant I think that might just. I guess that's not technically an air marshal.
Yeah, it's not air marshal. Yeah. I want a bouncer in the club. Like, hey, y'all doing too much. Hey, get y'all bags together. Like somebody in the tarmac.
Like, well, it does need to be someone like physically intimidating too.
Yes. Absolutely. Okay, but from flights to football.
Yeah, from flights to football. At Gojo Show on Twitter. If there's anything I missed on that list, I am very passionate about the shitty stuff that people do at airports. Don't get me started on airport lines either. I promise you, nothing in there is worth you waiting in anything longer than a 5-person line for. You can always find value above replacement somewhere else. Always. Brandon, I flat out refuse. I would rather go my flight without coffee than stand in a 10-person line and wait for coffee in the airport. It is not worth my time.
Okay, coffee is one thing, and that's Starbucks you're talking about.
It's any coffee place. I will not wait in line at any coffee place. I understand.
That's usually the line.
I understand.
Unless you're in Boston and Dunkin' Donuts.
I can say, or Connecticut, anywhere in the Northeast.
Okay, excuse me. Sorry about that. But I will say, though, Mike, when you're in Chicago, O'Hare, Midway, and like those popcorn tins, basically, if you're in a place that's regional and has their regional thing there, and this doesn't count, but it does feel like it does count, Popeyes in Atlanta. Like, if you're there, you should wait in line. Or Bojangles in Atlanta. Like, you should, everyone's there for a reason, Mike.
No, everyone's there for reasons to get where they're going. I promise. And if you've got time to kill and that's how you want to use it, by all means. I'm saying in normal layover time, I just do not have the patience for that. Maybe that's my brain becoming social media-fied, and maybe that's why I need to root for Twitter's demise instead of try and fight it off. But that's a story for my therapist and not for you guys. So, from airports to football, Brandon. We talked about this last week, a pretty inviting slate in the NFL weekend that largely ended up in the 1 o'clock window looking like dog shit. There was an abandonment of football offense for the majority of the early part of the game. But thankfully, we get to start with the fun shit because Sunday Night Football, man, the Chiefs alone are just one of the surest entertainment commodities in football because I feel like if you just mix them with either the Chargers or the Bills, we're almost guaranteed an instant classic every time. Like
you're going to give that to the Chargers too. I know Austin Eckler and Justin Herbert are tier to forces, but the Chargers aren't competitive. I mean, they are competitive, but not in the sense of winning games.
The Chargers are competitive in this rivalry, though, the games tend to always be one-score games, very close games. They tend to match up very well with them. This game, the Chargers got back. They had Mike Williams and Keenan Allen both available at the start of this game. Now, Mike Williams ended up getting dinged up during the body of this game, but you had a fuller complement of weapons for them. Defensively, Derwin James was incredible. Like, they came out here and they played the Chiefs really tough because, much like we've talked about for a lot of this seasons, there's not a ton of explosive potential necessarily on the Chiefs in the way that there used to be. And so when you go up a team that's got actual dynamite game-changing weapons like that for the Chargers, and boy, oh boy, did that show up in the first half, the way that Los Angeles was able to move the ball, we see, and we always have known this season, the Chiefs aren't going to go out there and like Golden State blow anyone out anymore. They've got the capability to strike quick still because that's how Pat operates. But in general, this was a good reminder of exactly where the Chiefs are and how they've learned to win really well against a team that on paper, albeit weapons that had been injured for much of the season, but still no disputing, have more talented weapons than they do.
Yeah, and they obviously are dealing with injuries all the time as well. It's one of those things that you you don't really consider the lineup because Patrick Mahomes is there. But in the same vein, Mike, the lineup is the reason why Patrick Mahomes doesn't have a Super Bowl, like that thin offensive line. But now that the offensive line is fortified and the offensive weapons are a little bit more lacking, Patrick Mahomes can still does what he do.
Yeah, well, I think that's certainly part of it, right? And what you just said there is sort of funny because we talked about this in the Kevin Durant conversation, the comments he made where he's like, because I'm in the lineup, you guys expect things from this team.
Right.
That's exactly right, and that's exactly the truth. But that's also exactly the gamble that this Kansas City team made with Patrick, right? They said, based on what we know about our quarterback, we believe he's good enough for us to make some roster transactions like they did this offseason where Tyreek Hill can leave, where you can bring in a bunch of variety receivers and still go out here and accomplish on a really high level because we believe our quarterback is uniquely capable. And that's why, like, to me, looking engaging right now, it is Patrick Mahomes' MVP to lose. Like, Tua Tagovailoa is very close, I think very closely in second in this conversation based on where we currently sit, because we know Lamar Jackson's been involved in this conversation in the beginning of the season. Josh Allen's been involved in this conversation, even as the Bills' offense has kind of hit a little bit of a rough patch as of late relative to their own success. You look around and quietly at the top of that is still Patrick Mahomes. Like, I saw the tweet yesterday that Mahomes is on pace for 5,550 yards, which would be the NFL record for passing in a season, in a year where, again, and this is where I feel like the context around these conversations is going to matter, is Tua Tagovailoa is an efficiency monster this year. He's an NFL leader in almost every meaningful, deep statistic that we can talk about with these quarterbacks here. The volume is just the different portion of these things because the Chiefs' offense with Patrick Mahomes runs almost exclusively through him. We've seen Pacheco, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who got hurt last night, play a part in it, and them being able to run in certain situations is always important. But Patrick Mahomes has thrown the ball 400 times this year. Tua, I think, has thrown the ball like in like the 230s or something like that. There's just a difference in the way that these offenses operate, and it's not to diminish anything that he is doing. Again, I think he's probably the second leading vote getter as far as the MVP, at least in my mind at this point in the season. But at some point, they took the best weapon that the Mahomes-led Chiefs had. They moved it over to Miami, along with a new coach, along with a bunch of these other things like Teron Armstead at left tackle and all these things. And now you're getting closer to the context that Mahomes has always had, right? Because Patrick Mahomes found himself in a really good situation. No one begrudges him that. And this is a thing we do with quarterbacks all the time. Mahomes found himself in a good situation in the draft because he wasn't picked inside the top 5. So he landed with an Andy Reid Chiefs team that had time with Alex Smith to put him in a situation and in a context that was going to help him be a really successful player. Tua did not have that. Yeah, Tua didn't have that in Miami. He's finally getting that now, right? He's finally getting, and that's not to knock Brian Flores, but it's just saying they've been building this thing for a while. He didn't have the offensive line to protect him early on. He was dealing with injury early on. He was dealing with Ryan Fitzpatrick being in that quarterback room and playing well early on. All of these things that now have come together and given him a context that allows him to go out here and perform at a high level. And so it's not knocking him for having weapons, but it's saying if we're going to have this top-end conversation about him versus Mahomes right now, that you took the best one guy had, moved it to another team that's allowed this guy to go out here and showcase his gifts to the fullest of his potential. But also there's the other side where they moved that, and Mahomes and this Chiefs offense haven't missed a beat. And they've been able to go out here and put up some really impressive numbers and still be one of the best passing attacks in the NFL.
Yes, but in a year where the NFL is down in passing attacks, right? Patrick Mahomes yet again becomes the Okay, let me refrain from Patrick Mahomes is doing really well, but I don't think the rest of the league is doing really well passing the ball right now. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes still is the best at it, even when the rest of the league is doing well. But I think the fact that the MVP race is boiled down between Patrick Mahomes and Tua says a lot about what's going on around the league for the defensive side of the ball. I think because there's a lot of opportunities that things are being taken away because obviously Jalen Hurts is doing things, scoring, Joe Burrow is doing things, moving the ball, Josh Allen, but Patrick Mahomes seems to have the least slump. And you said it's like they didn't miss a beat. They definitely had to make some adjustments in those first 4 weeks of the new personnel and things like that. But when it comes down to it, it looks like Tyreek Hill was incorrect about who is the most accurate quarterback. And I know Tua has the numbers, but it's just the balls that are being thrown, Mike. Like, I understand they're getting caught, but the balls that are being thrown.
I wouldn't even say it's an accuracy thing at all here, right? Like, Tua's been incredibly accurate this year. He's been functionally accurate this year. He's gone out and executed the exact way that they have asked him to in that offense. It's not a question of accuracy or not. It's just the overall picture of this. Like, last night's another perfect example where, and part of this is built up over time, right? This is what Tua's on the beginning stages of. Like, the conversation next year around Tua will be fascinating because we'll have banked a season where we now see him as one of the league's best quarterbacks. We've got some of that proof of concept now for him finally. We've had that for Patrick Mahomes to the point where last night we're watching that game and the Chargers score with like a minute 45 left, and we have now Patrick Mahomes is so firmly in that Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers camp of, oh, you left him too much time, and that becomes the easy memeable joke. But you can bank him going out and finding a way. The 13 seconds from the playoff game last year, he's just never out of it in these critical situations, and I think that always matters as well.
Well, how about I think Eric Bieniemy and Andy Reid have a lot to do with it, and Travis Kelce. Got to give him his flowers.
Yes.
I will give him his flowers later on, tease. But I think there's something to be said, the fact that Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes are playing Madden while everyone's playing like chess and figuring everything else out. Like, the fact that they ran the exact same play as they did to beat the Chargers on Thursday Night Football last season, that Travis Kelce scored the exact same play with just different personnel people, like, that just proves that they have a way to. It's almost like as they have that stuff scripted based on who they're playing.
Well, I think it's also a reminder of what Tua's getting now. Like, that's my point in all of this, is that it's not like saying that, oh, just because other places are getting nice things, that it somehow diminishes all that. No. Like, he's also getting video game coaching. Like, Mike McDaniel's been really good so far this season in the way that he's moved around pieces on that offense. They've got a bunch of fun toys to play with. Even in the run game, uses them all really well. And so it's, you're right, the Chiefs absolutely have done that for a long time too. And that's my point, is Mahomes walked into a situation where those things were there. He's always had really competent offensive coaching. He's always had weapons that he can rely on there. And with the exception of that run up to the Super Bowl where so much of his offensive line got banged up that by the time they saw Tampa Bay, there wasn't protection left, he's usually always had a good offensive line in front of him. And that's the case again now. So again, he'd be my MVP front runner. Tua very close behind in this conversation. You mentioned Hurts, Burrow. If the Bengals, especially without Jamar Chase, keep holding their ground and moving up ground in the AFC North, they're going to be a part of this conversation. Lamar Jackson is always lurking because of that ability. So we're going to have some stuff there. But Brandon, that conversation not going to involve right now anyone from the Minnesota Vikings, because it finally happened this weekend. The other shoe dropped on this. The Vikings got beat to sleep by the Cowboys in a game where everyone looked up and went, huh? Because the Cowboys were favorites on the road by Vegas. Our friends at DraftKings Sportsbook had them as 1.5-point favorites going into the weekend. And we looked at it and it said, huh? And it turns out Vegas could not have been more right. Brandon, if you told me this game was still going on right now, I'd believe you. It took so long for this game. It was like 30-3 in the middle of the third quarter. It was so bad CBS flexed to the other game between the Steelers and Bengals because they were done. They actually made them pass the sticks because this game was so bad.
I did not, Mike, I had no idea. I didn't realize I was watching Red Zone and everything's jumping in between. I feel like I'm already in the Steelers game, nothing really is going on over there either.
Well, I mean, that one was at least close and competitive and all these things. The final score ended up being 40-3 for the Cowboys against the Vikings, and it was that level of far apart the entire time. And Brandon, it reminded me a ton of the college football comparison. It was Notre Dame Clemson, right? It was Clemson and the Vikings reprising the role of a team. Very good team. team that is still technically a contender right now, the way Clemson is in college football, but not on par with its peers as far as down in, down out quality of play at the top end. And that was always the thing, is the record for the Vikings, I think, outpaced where they were as a team. What everyone's going to run with today is the Vikings are now an 8-2 football team with a negative point differential. They have been outscored by their opponents on the season. And that is, there's no perfect metric for divvying up what is successful or what works in football, but it's usually a pretty good indicator of if you've been out over your skis or not. And what we tried to say in last week, at the end of last week, was the Vikings are a very good football team, but right now they are not a great football team. They are ones that have found creative ways to win. We mentioned not being very heavily penalized, their opponents being very often penalized, a bunch of turnover luck built into that, good field position, all these things that aren't sexy and also aren't that predictive. And so it wasn't super surprising that they found their way waltzing into a game where Dallas decided, we're just going to beat you over the head with this thing until you pass out, and it worked pretty well.
Well, it helped that they had both of their running backs back. Obviously, Tony Pollard had another career day. It's something like, I'll get to the numbers of how impressive Tony Pollard was, but then obviously Zeke Elliott did his thing to let Tony get a little bit of a rest, and then obviously you had Dak Prescott playing like the Dak Prescott that Cowboy fans have always wanted him to play like.
Yes, Brandon, this is the archetype Cowboys game for this team for this season, right? If Cowboys fans could get this replicated where you're able to load up and stop early down runs on defense, because we know that had become such a focus of things. You had Micah Parsons back almost fully full-time as a pass rusher in this game to great effect in what he was able to do. Multiple sacks in this game for him. I think he finished with two sacks in this game. Overall, they sacked Kirk Cousins 7 times and felt like they were in the backfield even more. And they got themselves into the right down and distance, Brandon, and they committed more bodies to the run. In general, I think, quite honestly, if you're going to be a team that rushes the ball and exploits the disadvantage that the Cowboys have right now in that way, it's going to have to be a team that runs more at them. Minnesota, a little more of an east-west run team. Dalvin Cook, a really good zone running back, but that's not necessarily going to hit Dallas, and I think the places where it hurts the way that Green Bay did and the way that Philly's designed to. Like, I think Philly's still the best team in this division, despite the fact that they've been, by their standards, step back a little bit as of late. They still, I think, are built to hit Dallas in the ways where it hurts the most. But, Brandon, you said it, like, this was the model game win for this team. And that running back room is a perfect example of what we've talked about too. Ezekiel Elliott came back and was important for this team in certain points. He technically came back as the starter, which they talked about in the broadcast doesn't actually matter in a running back room. It's how you divvy up touches. And when you look at this game, it worked out perfectly. Like, yes, they had the same amount of carries technically in this game. Tony Pollard also ended up with a lot of the biggest plays coming in the receiving portion of this game. Was the leading receiver for this team, both in catches and in yards, had the 2 long touchdowns. The wheel is always open, college and in the NFL. But this is what Cowboys fans have been looking for, I think, is more situational use of Zeke, who's a great pass protector, who was awesome in goal line situations. It's why he came in and vultured the 2 touchdowns. But Tony Pollard is clearly the more explosive player, and they put those gifts on display. Like, this was what they had in mind when you had the Tennessee Titans that drafted Mariota and tried to run that exotic smash mouth offense that they called it, that everyone kind of laughed out of the gym. This was actually exotic smash mouth, where you used these multiple running backs creatively. You had a passing element that was built into this, but it starts with the ground game that was the foundation for the Cowboys.
I mean, it still seems like what the Atlanta's trying to do at Mariota right now. But to go back to Tony Pollard, 189 yards from scrimmage, 109 receiving, 80 rushing, 2 touchdown receptions. Pollard is the 4th player since 1990 to have at least 75 rushing yards, 100 receiving yards, and 2 touchdowns in a single game. The other 3 are Joey Galloway, Todd Gurley, and LaDainian Tomlinson.
Damn. Yeah, it's and this is very akin to like when Aaron Jones was being hyper efficient on very little use in Green Bay, and they had the free Aaron Jones movement led largely by fantasy owners, and now you're getting that. People want a larger sample size to see what this guy's been able to do and to watch it happen, and because it's best for this team.
Yes, and before we move on, I do want to hear what you thought about Trayvon Diggs following Justin Jefferson this entire game. Something that Trayvon Diggs doesn't do a lot of, but it seemed like it worked pretty well.
Oh, it worked really well, and I've heard Deontay Lee, who does a great job breaking this down on Twitter, and heard it in the broadcast yesterday. Even though it doesn't come with the same gaudy interception numbers as last year, he's playing better football, Trayvon Diggs, right now. And for this Cowboys team, we know they're built a very specific way on defense, right? They want to get you into third and passing situations. That's where they're at their absolute best. There's no doubt on that. But they earned more of those situations in this game. And I think that's got to be at least encouraging to an extent, even if we thought Minnesota was slightly overrated as far as the conversations people wanted to have. They were one of those teams that because they're winning, everyone goes, well, you're not respecting them enough, and we need to put more respect on them. Like, no, like we can be realistic about who they are when we all see the things that are getting them to this point, but that doesn't also diminish what they've done because they are still an 8-2 football team. They found a way to win those games in a league where that's really difficult, and it also doesn't diminish what this win was for the Cowboys, which was complete and utter dominance. They went out there and on both sides of the ball accomplished to that level, and Cowboys fans should be really excited about and I'm glad Dak got away from the narrative stuff. He was going to be under 500 since he came back from injury if they managed to lose this game, which would have been a stupid and shitty way to try and quantify this, but it was also important that he went out and played well, and he played an incredibly efficient game. He was the ball distributor that we want in the middle of this offense, and it really helped them. We got some Dak rushes in there as well, a couple of well-timed zone reads that are always, I think, going to be an important part of offense with him.
But I would say, as much as we want to pat the Cowboys on the back and wag our finger at the Vikings, I feel like year in, year out, this is hard to say, and this is very the most wide-sweeping generalization I can come up with. It feels like the second best team in the NFC East is usually better than the best team in the NFC North.
Well, no, I mean, because normally the Packers have been there.
Packers.
Yeah, you've had Aaron Rodgers, Packers as the NFC.
It just doesn't. It feels like a strength. It feels like a division strength thing. It's like the AFC versus the NFC conversation, where obviously the Cowboys are doing all the right things right now, but the NFC North has never really impressed us.
Well, I'll push back a little bit. I think that just the Lions and the Bears have been bad for a lot of recent history, and that's been the tough part. But the NFC East has also not been a hyper-impressive division in recent years. We've talked about these teams in really dire straits. That's why the rise of a team like the Giants, the fact that Taylor Heineke and Washington are hitting a good little stretch right here. It's become a deeper division than it's been in recent memory, but the top end of that division is overwhelmingly right now, based on what we've seen lately, it is Dallas and it is the Philadelphia Eagles, with the Giants and Washington then just a half step below, because again, with Dak Prescott, there's a balance here, and I think we saw it a lot over this weekend in the NFL of teams that are working around their quarterback and teams that are working through their quarterback. And I think the Cowboys are a team that can work through their quarterback. It can't all go through Dak Prescott. It can't be that extreme that we talked about with Mahomes, where you just put the ball in his hands as much as humanly possible because you want that guy to be able to affect the outcome of every play, right? At the end of the day, touches are distributed up based on your best weapons and how you want to use them. And some of that is telling to me when we go back to that Mahomes MVP conversation is if you've let him throw the ball 400 times, it's because, again, you've constructed a team around what you believe is overwhelmingly your best asset and someone that you want to be able to affect the outcome over and over and over again. And with, I always joke when offensive linemen get thrown touchdowns. Football is not a hard game. Get your best athletes the ball in space. That was this story for the Cowboys where, yeah, Dak is absolutely a part of that, but Tony Pollard's a big part of that, as was Zeke Elliott, and all of those things start to shape the perfect game plan for that team and at that time. And Brandon, speaking of working around or through your quarterbacks, I think I saw Mina Kimes tweet this, that the Jets and Patriots game was a masterclass in coaches who weren't going to let their quarterbacks go out here or a masterclass in teams coaching around their quarterbacks, something of that nature. Because, man, that was two teams trying not to lose that football game in the worst way. A 10-7 final in a game that's going to end up being a lot more about Zach Wilson than anything else because of his own doing, right? Like a bad offensive performance for the Jets. They had 2 net yards in the second half of this game. The stat that everyone will be running wild with today is the Jets had more punts, 10, than completions, 9, in that game by Zach Wilson. Like, no planet is that excusable.
No, it's not excusable, Mike, but I don't know. I feel like I'm personal. This is one of my November picks. This pushes me into 4-3 on my picks, which is a lot different than 4-2. And I don't know. I feel personally hurt by this, and especially by Marcus Jones. And I know you're going to get to him eventually, but Mike, I had the line. Jets thrust 3.5. I didn't care about how ugly shit was the entire game until the very last play of regulation for the Jets was a punt where they did not tackle the receiver.
Oh, yeah, no, listen, it was a terrible way to lose a bet. Like, the end of that game was a hilarious way, essentially a walk-off punt return touchdown by Marcus Jones to finish this game off and mercifully deliver us from the potential of overtime in that shit heap of a game. Honestly, did so many people in this great nation a failure or kindness in that moment. But Brandon, like, super windy in this game, as was pointed out by Zach Wilson after this game. But you saw 2 quarterbacks that were very limited, right? And it's not totally on them. And I think as we talk about Zach Wilson, who's going to become the star of this show for the early portion of this week, because one, he plays quarterback for a New York football team, and we know you're going to be scrutinized in a different level. And it's why it makes what happened with him after the game even more important, because Zach Wilson got to the microphone after the game, and they brought this up. You know, your defense manages to hold the Patriots to 3 points on the day. You guys can only muster 2 yards of offense. You know, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but do you guys feel like you let the defense now? And he gave a very quick no to that answer in a way that felt a little bit defiant, a little bit like he had already predetermined that answer, and just a lot like a guy who wasn't going to be told something by the media that he didn't like. And I always account, Brandon, for the fact that, again, emotional game, go out there. I'm sure Zach Wilson was not thrilled with the way that he played in that game or the way that that offense played in that game. But hearing it from somebody else can sometimes jar a little bit of that me versus you or us versus them feeling out of there. You got to stuff that shit here if you're Zach Wilson. Like, he's got to learn very quickly how to operate when things aren't going well in your circumstance in that particular city, because all he did was make more problems for himself and his teammates with the way he operated there in the mic. We can talk about all the other stuff that's going to start to trickle out because of this, because you're getting reports now that there are people frustrated with Zach Wilson in that locker room, reports that he's a person carrying himself like he's not the problem. He's the anti-hero in this locker room. It's me. I'm not the problem. It's me type thing. And all you do with displaying publicly yourself and positioning yourself the way he did is invite people to believe in those things. We don't see inside that locker room. We don't know if it's true. We heard from a very frustrated Garrett Wilson, your rookie wide receiver, after that game, who said that this shit can't fly and basically called out the game plan from the coaches, seemed to insinuate that no one involved, and I'd imagine the quarterback is catching a bit of a stray in that as well, or maybe even not in a stray. Garrett Wilson wasn't naming people specifically, but said that this shit basically can't fly. All of that is going to point towards the quarterback in that way, especially when you position yourself as someone defiant, as someone who's kind of abrasive here. Because you can't be abrasive and bad in this league, Brandon. You can be one. You can be one of each. Yeah. Like, if you're going to be not good at quarterback, you've got to go out here and you've got to blend in with the background. I'm not saying he's a bad quarterback, but you got to be Daniel Jones. Like, you have to go out here and be unoffensive and be someone that's not going to ruffle feathers and be someone that's a good hang if you're not going to produce well on the field. Because the other side of that coin is, if you're Aaron Rodgers, the last few years you have been very abrasive and people haven't always liked what you've done, but you're the back-to-back MVP. And so people are willing to tolerate a lot more. You don't get to be both, and right now Zach Wilson is teetering on seeming like both. He's been sort of milquetoast as far as who we've seen from him personality wise. You had the MILF Hunter stuff from before the season. Zach Wilson got that dog in him. It was all fun and games, but we haven't heard a lot from the dude in publicly. And even this is being defined by like 2 words right now. But again, in this city, at that position, you got to know. And if you don't know right away, you got to learn quick and you got to be able to adjust.
I'm glad you said that, because I feel like this is This is more indicative of him just being a young player in the NFL, and obviously riding off of a high for the Jets and him being in New York right now. Like, the difference between him and Daniel Jones is that I feel like Daniel Jones has like never even had that peak of personality. He's just consistently who he is, but we've seen a little bit of. Yes, exactly. We've seen a little bit of what Zach Wilson has to give after that big win against the Packers, and him starting to kind of. You saw Zach Wilson start to pat himself on the back for being a game manager more so than a guy who was deciding the game, and it was weird to see. But now, Mike, his biggest mistake wasn't just not blaming himself. It's not big upping Bill Belichick in that moment. Because Bill Belichick has the Jets number, and he also has young quarterbacks numbers. So I think if he just took a step back and start topping off Bill Belichick in his answer and start, that's fair, and just like giving respect to the Patriots and what they're able to do for them defensively, then I think he saves himself a little bit of trouble in that locker room, because it wasn't just the. In his defense, Mike, it wasn't that they let the defense down as much as Bill Belichick made them play one-handed.
Well, listen, I think the solution to this is very easy, right? Because they did let the defense down, and that's everyone involved. And when you watch that game, Zach Wilson is not the only problem. He wasn't well protected. We know their offensive line's been banged up and shuffled around. Right. The Patriots' defensive front was living in the backfield around Zach Wilson. There were other places to place blame. And you would be much more likely to get some of that bail from people if you go and do the most easiest day one leadership thing of all time, which is point to me in public, point the thumb back in public when it comes to the mistakes made, and dish the praise out everywhere else. If Zach Wilson gets up there and says, yes, we absolutely let the defense down. I let the defense down. I'm the quarterback of this team. Whether you believe it or not, whether people think it's cliches, people want real answers, yada, yada, yada. Every time you step to the microphone, especially as the quarterback, as a coach, you're talking to the fan base and you're talking to other people on the team. Because I guarantee, early on in my life, one of the things my dad always tried to communicate to us was don't make problems for your teammates. You don't want to be the guy that's saying or doing something that the rest of your team's going to have to answer for. And the rest of Zach Wilson's team is going to have to hear about this quote and is going to have to answer questions about their quarterback all week. And what do you guys think about them? And is there frustration in the locker room? He made problems for himself first and foremost, but he made problems for a lot of other people. And that's the cardinal sin of being a teammate. The easy thing is to say, yes, we did not play up to our standard. I did not play up to our standard. And as the quarterback of this offense, it starts with me. And if you do that, then all of a sudden, Brandon, we're not probably going to go all the way because this is New York and because you're a quarterback that's struggled a lot on the field. Zach Wilson statistically is one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL right now. But we'd be a lot more apt to go and maybe look at some of the other things that are wrong with this Jets offense if you didn't position yourself adversarially here.
Yes, he did make that mistake, Mike, but I would say the quarterback that can say it was on me is the quarterback that has proven that they've won because of him as well, right? And I think Zach Wilson is on thin ice where he doesn't have the luxury of being able to say it's on me and also comfortably keep his job through the rest of the season.
Well, but it can't even be about that, Brandon, because to me, that's no way to create an environment where accountability happens on a team, because there's a real nuts and bolts team thing that happens with that too, right? Where if I see you stand up in front of a room and you're not willing to say the thing that's your fault is your fault, if I'm on that team, why am I going to do that? You were the second overall pick. You get a lot more leeway in an organization than I do if I'm, X late round draft pick or X undrafted free agent. If I see you, and this is what we always say, if you see the best player working the hardest or doing the most, it becomes pretty hard to not do that yourself. When someone who has an important position like this stands in front of the room and says, yeah, listen, I got to do better. I fucked up on this. Then all of a sudden you got everyone else going, well, if that guy can admit it. Now, that's what I'm saying. This stuff isn't hard. I'm not the greatest leader that's ever listened. I wasn't even a captain of my team in college. This stuff is just easy to look at and see, though. And that's why it's frustrating when someone misses layups like this. But like you said, Young, he's coming from a BYU program that wasn't in the same national spotlight all the time. There's reasons why this can be a learning experience here. And that's for the off the field part. Because the on the field part, man, there's legitimate concerns that are starting to grow about about the environment that he's in, being able to foster this, being able to go out. Like, the last 2 minutes of this game from a football sense, I think are very instructive of how Zach Wilson is performing, but also how this offense kind of views Zach Wilson. Because remember, when they got the ball with like 2 minutes left in that game, it was 3-3 because no one was scoring any points that day. And they went 3 straight dropbacks in that game. The first throw should have been the first throw was a bad overthrow. The second throw was another one. I know people interceptable passes are a hot button issue with some people right now. Zach Wilson threw a ball right to Devin McCourty's chest earlier in that game that should have been an easy interception. And then on that last 2-minute drive, his second throw was one that should and could have been a pick six in that moment. And then the third time he got stepped up and got sacked in the pocket. You had the perfect microcosm of the Jets' day, where it wasn't all Zach Wilson's fault, but he had a hand in most of that. Then, Brandon, they got a defensive holding penalty. They got set up with 1:30 left, ball at their own 25-yard line, 2 timeouts in their pocket. They handed that football off the next 2 plays. Like, that was a team that did not want to let their quarterback go out there and lose that game for them. And that, to me, was pretty telling. In that situation, you didn't go, all right, blank slate, we got a new opportunity, we still got a chance to win this. It's we'll see if we can get this thing to overtime. Like, that's where the Jets are as an offense right now.
Okay, before I shit on him, I'll say the last thing in his favor. Breece Hall was a very important part of that success early on, and then being able to lean on the running game and kind of 1-2 punch with him and Carter. But now I think the reason why this is such a big deal for Zach Wilson is because the answer is there. Because you played against the Patriots, the big rivalry in that division for the Jets, the ones that obviously have had the key to the exit of that division for a very long time. And it seems like Zach Wilson is not the answer at quarterback for the Jets. And that's simply why this is so dire and desperate and bad, is X amount of 11 weeks into this season where Zach Wilson didn't even play the first 4 weeks of it. He seems to not be the answer for the Jets, and they have to go back to the drawing boards.
And we know we've had Stu Gotts in this show. They've been searching for a quarterback for a long time around there to try and find someone they can really get behind. And yeah, that is the concerning part of all this, is they're a 6-4 football team. They've been a good football team this year. Their defense in front four, like, the reason they talk about letting them down is because that front four is legitimately one of the best in football. And Zach Wilson go out here and say it was windy. Mac Jones threw for a very mild 246 yards in that game. He was also sacked 6 times in that game. Like, you saw similar problems presented to both offenses, where Mac Jones, I think we're learning more and more, is a good quarterback who's never really going to outpace the weapons that he's got around him on offense, or the circumstances he's got around him on offense, right? Like, he's like a boogie board. Like, if you put him in the right environment, things are going to go well if you're out in the water, but if you go and try and play with that on concrete, it's not necessarily going to work all that great. Like, this isn't an all-terrain vehicle. He's got to be in a spot that gives him the proper weapons to throw to and the proper circumstances to work with, which is most quarterbacks. But, when you're a first-round quarterback, people are going to look at you a little bit different. But he managed to go out there and throw in the same wind that Zach Wilson cited as one of the things that we've got to keep in mind in assessing this game.
True. But I think the way I want to give Jalen Hurts credit for finally having some consistency in his play calling at quarterback, I want to shoot Mac Jones a little bail for this season, because he just got thrown into a crazy situation with the play calling over there with the Patriots.
100%. And this is what we talked about, what we did with Miami, where Tua is finally be giving an opportunity to go out here and be an NFL quarterback in the right environment here for both of these teams. The Jets, they've tried to do that, right? Like, Joe Douglas and that front office tried. Their offensive line has just gotten absolutely mashed by injury over the course of the season. You mentioned Breece Hall being lost as well. Like, there's a bunch of legitimate reasons that we'd be a lot more inclined to talk about if your quarterback would just go out and say the easy thing and do himself a favor. And, like, it is possible to get better at that stuff. And I hope he does, so that we can just make this a quarterback assessment, even though the quarterback assessment's a failing grade right now. Like you said, there's very real reason to believe Zach Wilson's not the dude at quarterback for the Jets. They've got a lot of other things to improve, but right now the quarterback doesn't seem to be making making the progress at the pace that you'd like to see. And that's a lot of that quarterback class, right? The class of 2021 is one that's under a bunch of scrutiny for how they're performing in the bright lights at this point in this early juncture in their NFL career. And with the rookie contract being as important as it is and those fifth-year options being big decisions, these are things that I think people are less inclined to wait around for, because for Rob Saleh and company, those are their jobs too. Like, Rob Saleh is going to be tied to Zach Wilson's success as far as his coaching tenure, and that's no small thing. But again, like you said, I hope we're not trying to like dump any more on Zach Wilson than you have to, but this is an opportunity where he can learn about this. And like, shit, we just saw that in the NBA. Like, Kevin Durant, it's not going to probably get talked about a ton, but went on his podcast over at the Boardroom and talked about the comments that he made to Chris Haynes over at Bleacher Report after their game, that loss they had against the Kings the other week, where he said, look at who I'm playing with right now. The only reason you guys expect us to win is because I'm out there. And he said, I had to text my teammates and apologize for that because I chose my words poorly there. I was trying to communicate X. Instead, no one to blame but me communicated Y, and I embarrassed those guys. I made life harder for them. And he said I was embarrassed to walk around my team because of what I had done to them. And he acknowledged I needed to do better on that front. And I thought that was really cool for someone to just stand up and say, yeah, I made a mistake. That's not what I was trying to communicate, but I communicated it. And so I've got to own up to that. And I've got to get better at that. That's leadership in its own way, is just putting the hand up and saying, yeah, I didn't do good enough in this situation. And so it is possible in a big city like that where the media is going to be hyper-focused, and Kevin Durant's an infinitely bigger star than Zach Wilson, who's got infinitely more focus on him, but being the quarterback in New York is always going to bring you a certain level of that, to where we're going to all spend this much time looking at a couple of words because they clearly seem to indicate a lot more going on there. And so it's just a reminder, like, do yourself this favor in public. We're not asking people to be robots. We're not asking people to go out here and be inauthentic. But we are asking you to be aware of sometimes when giving the answer that you think is real is way more harm than good to you and everyone around you.
Damn, keeping it real goes wrong.
Shit.
Keeping it real goes wrong.
Brandon, speaking of keeping it real, you want to give out some roses for the weekend here? Monday morning on this podcast, we give out roses, bachelor, bachelorette style, to deserving winners from over the weekend that we want to take with us to the next round of this thing. Brandon, since we already mentioned a couple of them so much in talking about that game, I want to just start things off and give my first rose to Marcus Jones, the return man for the Patriots, who they inexplicably gave a chance, did the Jets, to return that football. They had done such a good job of punting away from him for so much of that day, and instead he gets a shot at that one, takes it for the house call, the Patriots win that game, and most importantly, we didn't have to watch any more of that game in overtime, because I know free football sounds good, but I promise at this point in the year, we're allowed to be a little bit more discerning. So Marcus Jones, thank you for saving us.
First time we've seen that in 12 years, Mike, since Deshaun Jackson left zero time on the clock with the Eagles, the punt. First punt to win the game of the season. But anyways, moving on.
I think it's the first. They say it was the first punt return for a touchdown of the season too.
Yes, that's what that's what I meant to say if I didn't say that. So yes. Moving on to my rose, Mike. I mentioned it before, but I got to give it to Travis Kelce, one of the best tight ends of our generation in NFL history, X, Y, and Z. But the Kansas City Chiefs, when they needed to, went 75 yards in 75 seconds, topped off with Kelce running across the middle. I mentioned before, the same way they beat the Chargers last season, but he finished with 3 touchdowns total. How long was that touchdown? 17-yard touchdown catch. But I don't know. What else do you say? I want to give all the flowers to Patrick Mahomes. I want to give all the flowers to Andy Reid, the offense, X, Y, and Z. But Travis Kelce is a man who just cannot be denied. And in a time when Derwin James has usually locked him up, he got his finally.
Yo, Derwin James is the fucking predator, by the way. That man is. Did you see him go in the backfield? And I forget if it was Pacheco or who it was in pass pro for the Chiefs, the running back, get absolutely like little boy tossed by him.
Yes, it's that's what my problem is with this Chargers defense, Mike. They have so many of those specific guys, and they can't do anything with it.
It's unbelievable, and they were good against the Chiefs, but like in general, like the rush defense thing has still been a problem. Obviously, injury first and foremost. We've seen Joey Bosa deal with a groin during this middle stretch of the season. You always want to see them be healthy enough to actually go out there and let those mutants. And thankfully, like, Derwin James is a guy who's dealt with plenty of injury. Thankfully, he's been on the field long enough for us to continue to see what an absolute freak he is. Like, Kelce called him one of the best, if not the best safeties in the game, and he's not wrong.
No. And I just want to say that in a time where we got really, really excited in the offseason for the AFC West and all the different changes and all the X, Y, and Z, the Chiefs still own the AFC West, and it seems like they're going to as long as Patrick Mahomes can throw to Travis Kelce.
Yes. Lather, rinse, repeat on that winning formula. Brandon, winning formula is where I go with my second rose. Been a while since we talked about him. America's team, the Detroit Lions. They've won 3 in a row, Brandon. Dan Campbell and the Lions getting this rose. Went out and put it on the Giants enthusiastically, 31-18. Jamal Williams continues to be just an absolute revelation this season as far as putting the ball in the end zone at running back.
Yep.
You had Aiden Hutchinson, another interception on the season, a pretty impressive one as well. But they've kind of hit their stride. They already eclipsed last year's win total. They're 4-6 right now. They were 3-13 last season overall. So it's I don't know, man. It's exciting for them. You saw Dan Campbell after the game. It's been the same message. Like, it's been a consistent message from him. And for them to finally get something to build on with that and some good things happening around that team. And they went out and beat a team who wants to have a very similar identity to them with the Giants, right? That was part of the reason I picked the Giants in this game, is I just thought they were more complete and more consistent on both sides of the ball in the way that they approached that with Saquon Barkley, but also with that defensive front. And the Lions came out and moved them. Amon-Ra St. Brown too, man. I know
huge difference.
They did the thing with the draft. Like, it's still wild to me. This team traded away T.J. Hawkinson within the division while they've got this going on,
and have gone on a win streak since.
Right.
Not since they lost the first game, and then these two back, but beating the Giants, and then also coming after beating, was it the Packers then the Giants?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just been very impressive. Obviously, Aiden Hutchinson, their first round pick, five and a half sacks, 2 interceptions this far in the season. It's like the first time since 1982 that someone has at least 5 sacks and 2 interceptions in their first 10 games of the NFL season, Mike. So I have to shout at him, because I was a little skeptical, because I thought David Njoku was not or Njabo was, one of the best Michigan defenders, and I was like, oh, maybe Aiden Hutchinson's benefiting from the other guy on the other side, but that guy's real.
Yeah, he's definitely real. He's exactly, I think, what he was at Michigan. I think there's a lot of that's shown up in those same ways. But I'm also happy, Brandon, because I wanted to see enough success. I was starting to get worried about Dan Campbell's job. As much as there's a long-term approach to this, at some point you can't keep losing that much and expect the message to take hold in the right ways. But with this now, and if they can keep this going, and they're going to be a 500 football team probably at best. I think that'd be the most hopeful ceiling that you could see for this team, more than likely, with some of the limitations there. But I think we're seeing enough, at least trajectory-wise, to where Dan Campbell is going to hopefully be allowed to stick around and see the best version of this that's going to come in subsequent years. So that's my it's my second rose. Who do you got for the second one, Brandon?
I've been going back and forth with this one, Mike. I like Micah Parsons for a while. Obviously, after the Sunday night game, there's some other candidates there, and I hate going offense because I'm a defensive player. But you got to give it to Devontae Adams. I really do think you have to give it to Devontae Adams, right? Like, he recorded 7 receptions for 141 yards, 2 touchdowns, a game-winning touchdown for 35 yards. He's just been –
Bro,
kind of felt bad for him.
He broke Pat Surtain off something crazy on that last play. Like, I know we're going to see that route replayed into oblivion, and it's kind of Captain Obvious, but it was still – wild to watch. We know Devontae Adams is one of the best receivers in the NFL, and Pat Surtain II is one of the best defensive backs in the NFL. The guy's 100%. A beast, but that was a my better's better than your better situation on that play.
And in a game where it was shit on shit with the Denver Broncos versus the Las Vegas Raiders, it was really nice to see that the most money that was spent for the Raiders turned into actual offense. Right, Mike? Devontae Adams has his third career overtime touchdown. That ties LaDainian Tomlinson with overtime touchdowns, the most in NFL history. I just think it's a bright light. Talking about Jason Fitz, who was on the podcast last week. I think it's a bright light for the Raiders where they really didn't have a bunch at all. So got to give my rose to Devontae Adams there.
Man, once I saw Derek Carr get emotional in that press conference last week, I said, I'm betting that team the following week. That man was in hell last week. Got beat by Jeff Saturday and is like, he's going to be a trivia question answer for the rest of time now associated with Jeff Saturday. And that man took that directly in his chest and said, no, we are not about to lose this shit.
Well, in a sport that's about family, it was nice that on paper, Derek Carr's best friend took it most personally to see Derek Carr so sad.
I will say, too, it was like you saw in the locker room after that game, that was a team that very clearly seems bought into Derek Carr as their leader. And I don't know what it looks like there long-term for Derek Carr. We've talked about the fit with him and Josh McDaniels that hasn't looked like it's been working. And a lot of me still thinks that he's the odd man out because contractually they're going to have a place to get rid of him. But it's not going to be for lack of effort or lack of trying on Derek Carr's part. And I think you saw that as a big reason why this weekend. So at Gojo Shaw on Twitter, if you got any people that deserve roses that we missed over the weekend. Brandon, you mentioned already our picks for the weekend. 6 thick picks for me. No Rut November for you. Tough one there. The Jets really fucked you over.
Can't believe it.
Hate to see that for you there. Jets plus 3.5, not cashing out. Brandon now 4-3, like you mentioned, on the season. Man, feast and famine for 6 thick picks this weekend. College bad, NFL very good. NFL, Dallas minus 1.5 win, Vegas plus 2 win, and Browns and Bills. God bless that Cleveland Browns offense for going down at the end of the game, getting points on the board, and fucking up the spread, but getting us right over that 48.5 number for that game in the final drive. What an electric way to sweat that one out.
I'm glad you had that, Mike, because there was a lot of people on the other end of that, so...
Yeah.
I like your picks.
I had a good time with that one. College, not so great. TCU minus 2.5 against Baylor. As soon as I saw them miss an extra point early in that game, I knew we were going to be dealing with some funny math that wasn't going to benefit me. TCU does find a way to skate by. College football Saturday night, where I broadcast games with Learfield on radio, will be down at TCU for their last regular season game against Iowa State this weekend. So very excited about that one. Nice. UCLA plus 2 ended up taking the loss in that game. Dorian Thompson-Robinson and the Bruins had a chance to drive and go ahead and win that thing. Ends up throwing an interception on that last drive. So I take the L there. I'm going to give myself credit because the fine folks at DraftKings ran a boost for the over or the under in that game, which was like 76.5. It was insane. And I publicly took the over on that hit, so I'm going to give myself that win, even though it wasn't in the 6 thick picks, because I desperately needed it at this point. Because I went against everything in my being. I went against what I should have known spiritually. Iowa versus Minnesota, the over-under was 32 in that game, and the under hit. Iowa ends up winning 13-10 in that game. I can't believe that I missed out. I bet the over in a chance where I could have been a part of one of the underest unders in the season full of Iowa unders. I'm ashamed.
I was optimistic. This is what I'm looking for. I was optimistic about that pick for you. Then I started looking at Minnesota and how many points they've scored recently versus late. And it's like, okay, they've had some 30-point games, but there's something about November with those northern colleges, just ground and pound the whole way. So I apologize.
No, you know what? It's my own fault. Again, got to put my hand up on that. Got to wear the hat. So overall, because I'm counting that USC and UCLA over because I'm very, very petty. 4-3 on the weekend. So better in the NFL. We're riding the wave on this one, and we'll try and make sure we get you better for next week. If that ever rounds out here. Listen, we're making adjustments right now. We're trying to figure it out. We're tinkering with the process, and we're making sure that we go out here and try and get some dubs on the weekend. But Brandon, all that as part of a wrap-up to the NFL weekend here. We'll have top 5, bottom 5 tomorrow for everyone to catch up on everything else that we had go on in the football weekend. But in the meantime, Brandon, do you know what time it is? Motherfucker! Oh, I knew it. You son of a bitch.
Oh, man.
Echo.
What do you think about that one?
I thought it was really good. You brought great energy to it. Who sings that, by the way? I'm forgetting right now.
Finger 11.
That's right. God.
Paralyzer 2007.
I was just going to say that was so early 2000s. That was, 2007, it was in the middle of high school. So that wasn't
oh, man,
that wasn't quite a pregame track or anything like that, but it was still, a good like ride to school, like get yourself a little amped up. I wasn't drinking coffee back then, so I had to search for these solutions a little more naturally.
Yeah. It's like that Linkin Park song where like the instrumental is everywhere. Right, like you just can't leave it, like college football, and like it was. I feel like it was a lot of ESPN interstitials between things.
I was gonna say that was pre-Imagine Dragons, before they could just take whatever Imagine Dragons song was new and make that the college football song of the year. So download, subscribe, rate, and review Gojo wherever you get your podcast. Leave us a 5-star rating and tell Brandon how much you appreciate. We've gotten a lot more rock and roll and emo, Brandon, late. So a diverse musical portfolio from our very own. Brandon, let's get to this. I mentioned I was at that South Carolina-Tennessee game. Massive upset. One of the biggest the biggest win in head coach Shane Beamer's tenure at South Carolina, one that very much shakes up the picture down the stretch of the season. Tennessee had been sitting at number 5, and while they weren't going to be able to play in the SEC championship game that was already decided in favor of Georgia in the East and LSU in the West, they were still in the college football playoff picture until that game. It was really, from the jump, complete and utter domination. Spencer Rattler, who was the former Oklahoma quarterback who transferred to South Carolina, had the game of his career, was lights out, is the best quarterback game I saw in person this season was from Spencer Rattler on that day. It was insane, Brandon, but the news, unfortunately, is on the other side, because Hendon Hooker, the star quarterback for the Tennessee Vols, Heisman hopeful, was one of the most well-known and most storied quarterbacks the last 2 seasons since he took over for Tennessee in the middle of last year. And unfortunate news coming out of this game. On a speed option play, he went to try and juke a defender on the perimeter of the defense, ended up going down with a non-contact injury that we now have found out was an ACL injury that will cost him the remainder of this season. The team put out a statement that said, Hendon Hooker and the family appreciate your prayers and support. His incredible journey has been defined by faith, perseverance, and strengths. Obstacles never stood a chance in his path on the way to greatness. Forever a Tennessee legend and the ultimate teammate, we know Hendo will come back stronger and ever as he embarks on a promising NFL career. And that's just it. Like, that's among many unfortunate parts of this, Brandon, for a guy that, had a very real has a very real shot of being a Heisman name mentioned when we talk about who goes to New York in this next month to be present for that award being doled out, and has been such an important part of Tennessee's reemergence onto the national stage. It sucks to see it end this way for him. I got a chance to talk to his parents a little bit before the game. They were down there in person, awesome. So I'm glad his family was close during what I'm sure was a really trying moment for him, and will be trying time coming up. But man, wish him the best. He's going to be a fun guy to watch get ready for his NFL opportunity, and is going to get the chance to make some team really happy.
Yeah, we're wishing him the speediest recovery, and I didn't know how much I needed Tennessee to be back in the fold and relevant again. And like, as much as we've given credit to Josh Heupel and what he's done with that team, Hendon Hooker's at the heart of it, especially when it comes to listening to how Noah Fant talks about him and things like that. So just hard to see, but definitely a bright future for him.
Absolutely, that's a guy who's going to be a Tennessee legend forever. Like, I don't think they use that lightly. Like, obviously we know Peyton Manning country and all that stuff, but for modern football and what he did as far as getting this program into that conversation that you mentioned, they're going to owe Hendon Hooker a debt of gratitude for a while.
Undervalued Tennessee legend Cordell Patterson. Shout out to him. He had his was it 9th kickoff return for a touchdown. So,
man,
they're out here.
They did that thing on Instagram where it was, you get one return man with the ball in his hands to save your life. Who are you picking? And I think it was Josh Cribbs, Cordell Patterson, Devin Hester, obviously back there.
Obviously.
And listen, If you're asking me, it's Devin Hester. Like, the guy should be a Hall of Famer. I think he's one of the greatest special teams player to ever live. Legitimate weapon. But Cordell Patterson's got a legitimate seat at the table as far as how deadly he can be back there.
How I play it, Mike, how I like to score when I play Madden on kickoff returns, I pick Cordell Patterson because it's all about wedges and angles and just downhill the entire time. There's too much funny footwork with Devin Hester.
Brandon Newman, special teams coach, and leveraging angles. All right, Brandon, let's get to that because depending on when people are listening to this podcast, if it's Monday when it's released or if it's later on, the U.S. men's national team is beginning the Men's World Cup pursuit on Monday. They get started. Their first game is 2 p.m. Eastern against Wales. We're in Group B. We got England in there, who's going to be our second match in the group. So obviously that's super important for Christian Pulisic and the boys as we get to that point of the year now where, hey, if you're like some of us and like me, who's rooted for an English Premier League team for a little bit, you're used to Christian Pulisic. I haven't spent as much time with the national team, so I'm excited to learn all their names for what I hope is a nice run to like the Sweet 16.
Learning all their names, caring about them into perpetuity. I love all of it. Landon Donovan, Josie Alidor, where's the Clinton Dempsey? Like, I want new names for this as I think about the U.S. men's national soccer team. We got plenty of women that we know by name, but after being out, was it the last 2 years in a row? I'm just happy that the U.S. has a representation in the World Cup, so we have a fighting chance.
Yeah, it is. It's nice to, it's like they say about awards. It's an honor just to be nominated. Yes. We understand that this sport has not traditionally been our strong suit around here, but we're trying. And I feel like at any given moment, I don't actually know how back the men's national team is just because every few months I get those headlines, I feel like coming off a friendly or a CONCACAF game where it's like, hey, the U.S. men's team's finally putting it together. Some of our young pieces are really in a good spot. And then like 6 months later, it's like the sky is falling. Everything's bad. And I'm not really sure. So we'll figure it out either way and we'll get it started. Against Wales because, Brandon, the World Cup is always a weird thing to try and digest because it's one of the most problematic sporting events in the world. Every time it happens, it comes with a host of things that we have to reckon with as far as the moral approach to this and how much we can digest, which it feels like the World Cup constantly and FIFA constantly treat this as like an Olympics for how much awful, problematic human rights violations related content they can have associated with this event, and people still find a way to go out here and support their country and support other stories involved in this that are great, worthy stories that we are excited to tell as we go along with the World Cup, because there are a lot of really important conversations to be had through the lens of this sport and this event, but it just gets off on such a tough start when the lead-in every time is what we've seen with the country over there and the last minute switch they pulled with their beer sponsor as far as that state's willingness, that country's willingness to allow alcohol purchases on site. You've got LGBTQ plus fans worried about going over to a country that is very known anti-gay and worried about how they're going to be received there. You have a number of the countries as well getting ready to show up with armbands. They're really in protest of a lot of the human rights violations that are known and associated with Qatar. And so all of that is the backdrop of this. Is just a reminder that this is what we're walking into, and these are the things that are a part of this conversation. And you can watch and enjoy this. I'm going to watch and enjoy what goes on here, but you also can't diminish and just completely look away from the things that we know are going on. At some point, we're going to have to talk about them. At some point, we're going to be here and do a much better job of that. But it's kind of the bargain that you have to make on the front end of this thing.
Yeah, and I don't know if enough people are considering those things while enjoying this content. It's we talk about a lot this with we talk about this a lot with the NFL and certain franchises, but representation of an entire country leaves a lot more available to critique and criticize, Mike. But from an American standpoint and where we come from, we just want to put a nice bow on it when it comes to TV and entertainment. Ted Lasso went out here and put billboards around all the major all the hometowns of everyone that's on the U.S. men's national soccer team. So like there's a through line for Americans that we can get behind without fully understanding the magnitude of what's been going on in Qatar.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's a very easy event to wrap the flag around yourself in. It's comfort food, right? It's
Right.
simple for most of us to digest in that way, even if what we've got going on the back end. And Gianni Infantino, the president of FIFA, came out and embarrassed himself completely in his opening remarks for this that were really antagonistic. So it is. You've got simultaneously one of the easiest sporting events to root for because it is your country and it is this game that is so popular worldwide. And then you've got this organization that is just so corrupt and awful on the other side. So a lot to take in there, but like we said, we will be watching, we will be telling the story as it goes along. Hopefully we'll have some help from some more folks that are going to be involved in the World Cup coverage over here at DraftKings, at Meadowlark, and all the alike there. Brandon, let's finish this up at the third though. Because with the third, we have something I saw over the weekend. The Falcons and the Bears played a very exciting football game with two flawed but interesting and entertaining offenses. And as part of that game, we ended up seeing a viral photo start to make its way to the internet of a group of guys at a bachelor party at Mercedes-Benz Stadium for that game, all dressed up in costume as famous Bears tight end and coach Mike Ditka. Brandon, is a Ditka-themed bachelor party cool? And if not, is there a better coach that we could pick that would make it cooler?
Okay, now let's slow down because bachelor parties have a lot of themes based on the day. Is a Ditka-themed bachelor party day appropriate? I think so. When it comes to the drip and the swag, because it is important to look good as well as feel good while you're mimicking the coach. And then the fact that they went to the actual game, Mike, is really the cherry on top because this is kind of like Halloween carryover. But I do have a little bit of issue with Mike Ditka off the field when it comes to his quotes and who he is. You know, he's this odd like Herschel Walker hybrid. But anyways, I say that to say I can't think of another coach's costume though that maybe a Bear Bryant, like nothing hits like a Mike Ditka costume hits.
It is very iconic. It is very easy to see from a mile away. To your point, instant brand recognition, especially, self-selecting sample size. You've got Chicago Bears fans in attendance who are going to know and see that. Brandon, the only other one I could come up with that I think would be identifiable, but also I think important for this setting, very comfortable. Bill Belichick.
Ooh, cut off sleeve hoodie?
Cut off sleeve hoodies with the boys, seems like a very easy recipe for a long day of drinking at a sporting event. I think you're just setting yourself up for the most success on the outfit front.
I agree with you, Mike, but when it comes to mimicking, think about the energy that someone gives with a Ditka with a cigar versus just hands in the pocket of the cutoff sleeve and just murmuring, like, oh yeah, we're really excited about tonight.
I do love the idea that if you were flirting with a girl or something, if you were another one of the guys in the bachelor party, if you're Ditka, you get to do the whole Saturday Night Live and you get to channel the Chris Farley energy with that.
Right.
Oh, there's so much built into it. And with Belichick, it'd be you have to mumble talking to the girl unless she brings up lacrosse or a white slot receiver for a different team. Then all of a sudden you're oh well, yeah, I'd be happy to talk about this.
Oh man, get to the draft and not say anything. But I as a big guy, Mike, I feel like Andy Reid is what you're really looking for. And shout out to, I think Brian Daboll is what Rachel Bonnetta did last Halloween. But the one before that, she was Andy Reid. I just like that big walrus mustache, the glasses, the hat, and also the ability to just eat hamburgers as a prop.
Yes, you've got hamburgers, and also comfort of outfit wise. You can wear Tommy Bahama shirts pretty comfortably. Andy Reid always shows up to that coach's picture at the annual meetings with a nice new dripped out Tommy Bahama shirt. So that's another good one there. Because besides that, the rest of them, I don't know if we've reached that cachet. Mike Tomlin would be really fun if you had all of his press conference quotes ready and available to go. Might be a little less publicly identifiable at this point than some of the Ditka stuff. You'd be playing more of a niche bit, but it'd be pretty entertaining.
Listen, we want volunteers, not hostages. So
we will defend every blade of grass. We don't subscribe to the mystical or anything of that nature here. the standard is the standard, all those things that you could throw in there. So at Gojo Show on Twitter, if there's a coach that we're missing that would be the best bachelor party thing. You mentioned before, Ted Lasso would be a good one too. Easy for everyone to see. Similar outfit as far as what you're going to put together with the Ditka one there. Very affable white man. So it all works out pretty well.
Yeah, there's a vibe too that you can mimic and, just believe.
And then until you get to like the season 2 version where you've got to grapple with all this internal struggle and then start going to therapy in the middle of the bachelor party. And then it gets tough.
Darkness. Shout out to Olivia Wilde too. Don't Worry, Darling is actually a really fun movie.
There you go. I would say, by the way, her and Harry Styles taking a little break right now. So,
Never officially a thing, Mike. So watch your tongue. You talking about the salad dressing? Have you dived into that stuff? Because we need to talk offline about it.
Yeah, no, we'll have that conversation for another day. In the meantime, we hope you liked our salad dressing here at Gojo Show. If you did, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Leave us a 5-star rating and a review. And also make sure you check us out on the DraftKings YouTube channel at the Gojo of Mike Golick Jr. playlist. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you tomorrow.